together the January 6th, 2020, believe it or not, Harwich Board of Selectmen meeting. And just read this statement. As required by open meeting law, you are hereby informed that the town will be video and audio taping as well as live broadcasting this public meeting. In addition, anyone in the audience who plans to video or audio tape this meeting must notify the chairman prior to the start of the meeting. Is anyone interested in doing so? If not, I move to ask you to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Joe, as usual, you're our first guest.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Happy New Year to all. We have the sewage work improvement phase 2. We have weekly updates for contract 1, and this week I'm introducing for the first time a construction schedule update for contract 2. For contract 1, the one week look ahead for the week of January 6th through January 10th, the mainline sewer crew number 1. They are still working with their subcontractors who are performing various tasks at various locations. Mainline sewer crew number 2, they continue installation work on Route 137, which means detours are still in place. And on Friday only, they will continue installation on White Pine Circle. The 2-week look ahead for the week of January 13th through the 17th. Again, subcontractors working with crew number 1 and mainline sewer crew number 2 continuing on Route 137 with detours. And pretty much the same look for the week of 120 through 124. It's my understanding that even though January 20th is a holiday for the town, they will perhaps be operating, and I'll confirm that for next week's update. Beyond that, the update for Phase 2, Contract 2. So this is the contract and the work that will be performed by RJV Incorporated. They have informed us that they're scheduled to commence their work beginning the week of January 27th, 2020. I'm working with staff. We've established coordination meetings that will occur next week between RJV, RBO, and staff and engineering firm. So I'll have updates from those coordination meetings. We're also going to do a follow-up coordination meeting with the town of Chatham, just because they have their project coming closer to the work area that we're dealing with. So all parties agreed that it would be good to have those meetings. So I'll have more in-depth updates after those meetings next week.
Thank you, Joe. Joel and I have talked because we're very interested in the coordination. Both of the companies have given us their proposed schedules, and I know they're trying to coordinate it. I wanted us as a town to double check that we're, if we needed to change the schedule somewhat to help traffic patterns, we should do so. And just be sure we're in charge of that going forward. So there are some discussions. I appreciate that you're going to continue that because we may have to override some of their initial schedules if it means we can get around. I can get here occasionally.
Exactly.
And others right in that area. So thank you for any questions or comments on where we're going on sewers. Okay, move next to public comments and announcements. How unusual. Carolyn's going to have a... Have you recovered from the holidays?
Not yet. We're working on it. I just wanted to let everyone know that the light display at the Cultural Center has been taken down. I wanted to thank the police and especially the Doan family who put up the display. It had quite a few visitors, and we appreciate everyone's indulgence to make it a one-way during that time. And then just a teaser to let you know that next month the community center will be 20 years old, so the birthday celebration will be coming out. There are several different events scheduled, including a dance, a kids' pancake breakfast, the Find the Fairy Doors. There is a cake baking contest, so you'll get the full schedule, but just stay tuned because they'll be coming very quickly because we start. The official day the building opened was on February 5th, and then the opening for all of the clubs and organization was February 14th. So just a short time, we'll be 20.
And your activity, the schedule you're going to provide us all will be basically starting the 1st of February then, that
It
type
will.
of timeframe? So you only have we have a little bit of time, us to read it, but you don't have any time.
Yes,
what
and
you're
they'll be
saying.
posted on the community center website as well as on the Channel 18, and there'll be flyers everywhere, but we hope you can find time to stop by. It truly is everyone's building, so
Yeah.
we're very grateful.
Thank you, Carolyn. Good evening, Richard.
Chairman, member of the board, Richard Waystack from the Board of Assessors. Mr. Nightingale and I just came up from a meeting, and from the phone calls and the visits to the Board of Assessors, to the assessing department today, people have received their tax bills. And I just want to remind people that we have 3.5 weeks left to file an abatement if someone wishes to challenge the value of their property. I will remind, as I have for the last 4 weeks, that an abatement process does not challenge the amount of taxes that you have to pay. And if you wish to file an abatement, you must pay your taxes. The one reoccurring theme that has come up in the last 3 days and through the questions today from the assessing department is that this bill that you received last week is your first actual tax bill. Your previous 2 bills were estimates. So it exacerbates when you see the increase in taxes that you have received because it is your first actual bill. Your first 2 bills this year were estimates. This is your first tax bill at the higher tax rate. So if you wish to challenge your value, you have a right through the abatement process. It must be to us by February 1st. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Richard. Anyone else for public comment? Announcements? If not, we'll move to consent agenda, and Don, I think you need to hold one of these items.
Yeah, the 24th.
Would you care to move on the other items?
I believe it's the 24th. Let me just see here. Yeah, it's the 24th. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that we accept the minutes for, on the consent agenda for June 10th, 2019, July 1st, 2019, and vote to approve and sign the 2020 seasonal population increase estimate form.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? Anyone from the audience? If not, all in favor? Thank you. We'll move to public hearing. This is a joint meeting in FinCom and capital outlay with the Board of Selectmen. And Joe, I guess Jack, you want to call your meeting to
Just
order?
want to point out that the Finance Committee does have a quorum.
Thank you. And Richard, capital outlay? So do you?
They got more in their quorum than you have in your quorum.
And if you called your, excuse me, if you called your committees to order,
I call the meeting, FinCom to order.
and you've done the same, Richard, so we're ready to go? Okay, would you do that?
My vice chair's coming.
I just want to be sure we have it, we have it on the sound legal footing that you were all called to order.
There's no mic. He doesn't have a mic.
Copy of that capital plan.
He can't be heard on TV.
Thank you.
Jack, you good? Okay. Noreen, we're just getting you a mic, so.
Did you discuss that first?
We're trying to keep it away from you.
There's more if people need them.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I may, in accordance with the provisions of the charter, the public hearing this evening between the Board of Selectmen, Finance Committee, and Capital Outlay Committee for the draft plan that has been presented by transmission of me to the board on December 23rd, publication on the town website and available in the administration department. All parties should have in front of them the draft plan as most recently updated on December 23rd, 2019.
Okay, thank you, Joe. I think our next step, well, if I can turn it over to Rich and Noreen to walk us through kind of some of the capital outlay, is that the plan?
Well, Joe, do you want to take it, or
Well, I
we go by
built,
department, you want?
yeah, I build off of what I had said to the board on December 23rd in my analysis memo. Really, the major items that I think still need to have some vetting through this process and a later vote by the board. If I can draw your attention to, I believe it's page 3, as it relates to wastewater. You can see that under the TA recommendations. 2 items there that have yet to be voted on by a capital outlay committee. The expectation is, if that's to go forward, I'll be presenting that to the capital outlay committee sometime in the spring, ahead of town meeting for the committee to vote on it. But it's the 2 items, the first related to the DHY Harwich share of treatment, the 1.5 million, which would require a debt exclusion, and Phase 2, Contract 3, the additional work relative to the present phase of 8.4 million. Otherwise, everything else has been vetted and is fully endorsed and recommended,
Okay,
if I've gotten that right.
Yeah, just on top of it, if we can go back to the meeting that we presented this before New Year's. A total of 11 million, for the viewing audience and so forth, a total of 11.7 million funded by debt exclusion, nearly 73% of total funding mechanism. The items that are listed in the plan itself, the pumper and ladder request converted to ladder called the quit under fire department, 1.1 million. A 5-year road maintenance plan under public works for 700,000. The 1.5 for the DHY wastewater plan, and the Phase 2 Contract 3 under wastewater for 8.4 million. And finally, there were items added for Channel 18.
thank you, Rich. I think from our, and Joe, I think from our perspective, we haven't acted and made recommendations on the wastewater issues yet, and that'll be a discussion we have as a board, and bring back our, because I think we're still trying to sort through, maybe not so much the numbers, but the timing of it, and come back to a recommendation. And even the 700,000, I think we need to debate that some, whether we, it seems very vital, but there are a few things that we have control over that may affect our overall town budget, and capital outlay is certainly in debt structures when we do have some say in.
Well, this is a prime example of when we speak about the plan being fluid and able to change until we get to town meeting. Prime example, so.
Exactly. And that really is, we can underline that with wastewater, because if we take the capital outlay as a first stage, and then we have some flexibility on when we do the wastewater projects that we should be able to tie into our capital spending and debt structure, so we can keep our level funding going forward. So
Correct.
we've had some discussion, Joe, you and I have with others, of how we go back, and I think Joe and Carol have, how we go back and relook at that to make sense, not just in the near future, but the long term, that we're not, nothing sacred, as Noreen and you and I have talked many times, and probably you more than me, but there's nothing sacred about the 5-year phasing program. That's one issue. There's not a lot of things we can argue about it, but that's one we can discuss, and we will. Is there any comments from, I guess, Jack, then I'll come back to the board.
Sure. Let's start with the board. Hey, Mark, do you have anything?
No question. No.
Tom?
I'm good.
Dale?
No.
John?
I have a question. I mentioned it 2 weeks ago when you presented to us about filling in the blanks that are there for years out. And it was mentioned, you just mentioned that there was a fluid plan before we go to town meeting. So is there an intent to have all those blanks filled out to year 7. I know we're switching to a year 5 on the capital plan. So a year 5, all those blanks filled out before town meeting? Because it's my understanding that once the town votes on this plan at town meeting, the only way it can be changed is at town meeting the next year by a 2/3 vote. So my question is there a plan to fill out all those empty blanks for all the departments up to year 5?
I think Noreen first, and I'll go to Don.
I'll defer to Don.
Don, okay, Don, you get first.
Yeah,
crack at this.
it might have been a confusing discussion for everybody. What passed last year at town meeting still has to go through the ballot to make it actually happen. It's 7 years, not 5, and when it gets locked in next year, you won't be able to move anything. This year, Rich is absolutely right. It's fluid for this year's presentation to town meeting.
Right.
You're basically starting fresh next year with 7 full years filled in. And if something has to skip the line, it'll be a 2/3 vote, but that's presuming that it passes the ballot this year.
Is there any reason why we can't do it now?
No, but it's going to be required next year. I'm just pointing out that the
Yeah.
requirement doesn't kick in until next year.
And we're going from 7 to 5 if it passes the ballot, right?
We thought that amendment had been made, but it wasn't. The actual passage last year was for 7 years in the capital plan. That was the motion.
Can I, this
Richard?
meeting is a public hearing about the plan, not the process.
Right.
Right, and that's why I was saying, your
Right.
plan is actually in accordance with what the charter calls
So
for
this-
right now.
John, we'll have to come back on that, but just keep this discussion, as they say, to this year's budget. Doreen?
To the other part of John's question, we had kind of a confusing conversation 2 weeks ago when this was presented. And John, I just want to understand clearly what you're asking.
They're saying is it didn't pass.
It's the motion.
So, John, are you suggesting, for instance, let's say we were to look under, find a good department.
Administration, pick administration,
Okay, so
the first one.
when you look at these and want zeros, and I'm just trying to really understand your question, where it's coming from. Are you saying you believe there should be zeros in every place?
No, I'm not. I'm thinking that for us to plan here effectively, I'd like to see either 5 years or 7 years. We'll debate, because it looks about that later, but let's pick 7 years then. I'd like to see it filled out for 7 years, so that we know what we're expected or thinking we're doing 7 years from now. It could be a placeholder. I realize a lot of these numbers are placeholders, just like the road maintenance, $700,000. You put that in every year. We may jump that up to 800,000 as the cost of asphalt goes up. So that's what I'm asking for.
Okay, Rich?
Yeah, I mean, I understand where John's coming from.
Right.
There's an issue of Finance Committee dealing with operating costs that are yearly. John, that's the way it is. And what the Capital Outlay Committee is looking at, anything greater than $50,000, and that's assumed we're going to be spending. It's not your capital plan. It's the capital plan that's coming out of the town administrator's office for the town at large expenses, and what are they expected? I agree with you. If they can be filled in, they should be. They used to be called placeholders. But if they don't have a placeholder and they're zero, you're not going to make up a number. And, that's the way I feel.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, it's my
You have
understanding,
operating costs. You have to,
it's
I'm
my
sorry.
understanding that all financial matters related to the town.
then why have two committees?
You're a help to help us.
No.
Help us
We
selectmen.
help the town administrator.
Yeah, we don't need to debate
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay,
in that
okay.
fashion.
It's not
Let's move
process.
on and do this
Yeah.
as it is, and then we'll look going forward, John. We've talked about this in the past. As Rich, you say Pete Wasson was famous for placeholders.
Yeah.
But,
And it makes
and those are very useful. What the downside of that was, if you put a placeholder down 7 years, you always greatly exaggerated, because you don't want to have to go back to town meeting for 2/3 vote to make it happen. So there's no perfect system. We try to work with it.
Right, and Don's comments are 100% correct, and we've gone through with Ed. Ed's been on the committee.
Let's debate this, and then, John, you have a good point, but just bring it back when we get into the next plan. Is there Jack, anyone? Jack?
Yeah. Where do we stand right at this point in time, Rich, on what percent of the articles have estimates that are, I would say, firm versus not yet, they're not yet firm? And what do you think it's gonna be going into town meeting? Because that's been a topic the last few years.
I think Joe can answer that. I think we're at 99%. It's
Yeah,
the two
already?
wastewater.
That's a big number,
It's the
yeah.
two, yeah, that's,
But
It dominates.
to answer that question, Mr. Chairman, it goes back to my original narrative that the only items that are really in play relative to what the COC had done relate to wastewater as well as Channel 18. Now, the Channel 18 numbers that were added prior to my presentation on the 23rd, those numbers are solid. Wastewater, it's going to be based on, I think the two numbers presented there are solid numbers. It's more a question of whether those numbers are going to prevail. For the COC has said, I would agree that we're probably, I'll say 95% there, but the vast majority of these are solid numbers.
And are we aligned on where we're going to be at as closer we get to town meeting? Do we have some kind of tracking system to know that we're going to get there?
I'm not sure I understand the question. You mean that these prices, these estimates will stay firm, or how we're going to
Yeah.
double check those?
We're gonna- Yeah.
I haven't given that thought. That's a good point, to be sure we have some points going forward to double check that.
Mr.
Let me
Chairman,
work
if I
with
may.
Joe, and we'll come back with a,
I would say in the short term, the answer is, I'm your tracking system. I'm working with the finance director. And we are, and that's not to implicate the finance director, that's to thank the finance director. But if there's anything that changes substantially, obviously I'll advise the Board of Selectmen and make it well known to the community that there are changes. So we'll actively work these documents to make sure they're as close to sound as they should be as we work through this process, the budget process, and preparing for town meeting.
and I think our assurance will be to email both the chairs of the FinCom and Capital Outlay, so you know any of these changes
the
going
only
forward.
comment I was going to make is the numbers that we have here, of the, I'm going to call the 99%
Right.
that we're at, okay? Contractual, if they're, or if we're buying something and the price changes
Right.
between now and then, it's obvious we're going to change it. But I'm talking about they are considered rock solid. If we go to the fire department, they're saying it's $1.1 million for whatever, and it turns out to be $1 million, well, you're going to be happy to see it go down. If it goes $1.2 million, they still got to come back. Anything that goes up comes back to the capital outlay committee for a vote. If it goes down, we don't have to vote.
Okay.
So that's the good part.
Anything else, any of you? Angel, any questions or comments?
Just a comment. I think it would be very helpful if the selectmen could determine how much money can be spent on these total projects. Because there are a lot of activities in here. Maybe if you needed to try and get close, keep the tax level down some way, maybe if you came up with a number that would be effective for your budget, then we could work on what things can be perhaps eliminated. Because what we do is we look at each department, what do they need? Have they done a good job in estimating what they're getting? Is it something they might need? But there are things that might not be needed at all. And I think maybe that should be reviewed.
Good
But
idea.
having a target would be great. Thank you.
Good suggestion, Angelo. We'll work on that.
We're all set right now.
You all set? Rich, your crew have any, Bruce, do you have a comment?
Pete, you good?
You're set,
Angelo, you're
Pete?
good?
Angelo.
You're good.
Yes.
Okay, let me ask now, Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, I agree with Angela, and I was going to say something to that effect. Part of it, but it's more complex than that. We're going to be looking at that. It's not just how much money we've got available. It's especially as we transition to something that's longer. It's what's coming off the plan and how long you bonded what you're just accumulating now. Because when Mr. Wastack was here before, I'm certain that people were confused about the tax bill. Oftentimes, you vote to approve a project, but you don't actually go out and borrow the money for a year or two, so it doesn't hit your taxes. You may think that it had, but it hasn't. So we really need to look in terms of the stability, because that was one of the things we were discussing all the last 2 years. How do we get to the point with the sewering so that it maintains some sort of flat line at some point, and it doesn't have sharp spikes up? Because in year one of the borrowings for that, they already raised the overall tax rate, from here to here, if you will. And the expectation was that things would come off, things would go on, and we'd be able to maintain that line somehow. That's got to be part of this discussion, because as we go forward and we face things, surely that line's not going to be flat. So we're probably going to need to know what it is we borrowed, how long the bonding is, so we can have an expectation of when that comes off. But other than that, what's coming off that's available to be spent?
Thank you, Don. Ed?
The other item we need to know in making that determination is what the revenue source is. Because not all bonds are paid by the tax rate.
Thank you, Ed. Michael?
Well, first, thank you to Capital Outlay for submitting this plan and vetting this plan. You did an awful lot of work. I appreciate it. I get it. I do also understand the question that's been asked and when this is going to come up, that we're going to have it in ironclad line that we'll have to go to town meeting and change. But thank you very much. Just to Angelo's point, I was going to hit on that. It pains me to agree with him, but I think that the board needs to, the board really needs to get involved as quickly as we can so that we can educate town meeting or the taxpayers as quickly as we can. And Finance Committee, we're hitting a point where we have to start saying no on a lot of things. Carol, if I could ask you just a quick question. And just really to point it out, because I do think that as we look at this list, $1.446 million is available in free cash. It's spent in this plan for this year, with no money going to OPEB and no money going to stabilization. Zero. I can't remember us doing that, at least in the 4 years that I've been here, but we've now spent all that on equipment. I do think, in the case of the fire department's, the Quint, they've proven that we're in desperate need of a new ladder truck, and this is a cheaper version of a ladder truck, and they're saving us money, and we need it. But can a portion of our free cash, can any of this other stuff go away? Can we say no for a few years and pay for some of that ladder truck with free cash so that we're not doing a debt exclusion for that much money? Carol, the two drivers that we've been talking about on the budget, which seems to go up between 4% and 7% every year for the last 5 or 6 years, those two drivers are contractual obligations with the unions and debt service, correct?
I would say that's correct. The town of Harwich has been very generous. The voters have been very generous in authorizing some of these capital projects. And when that vote is taken, it takes a couple of years or more than that to catch up to selling the bonds and funding the debt. And as you know, the debt is funded with taxpayer dollars. Even, you may call it a debt exclusion. It doesn't matter. It's still, you have to raise taxes to pay for that. So there are a number, there's a number of existing debt obligations that the town has currently. There's a number of items that have been authorized and still have been not issued yet. And then there's some that are, as you are aware, are being proposed this evening. So I have prepared documents, debt schedules, estimated debt schedules that go out to 2078, year 2078. and made a concerted effort to try to level that debt so that we don't see great swings every year. That's difficult because I don't know what, I mean, we have CDM Smith has provided the town with I guess a timeline and a plan for the $292 million now. But we don't know that that's going to come to fruition. We don't know what the interest rates are going to be the next 40 years out. So I do have that document that I'm happy to share with anyone that would like to see it.
If you could share that with the board members and get it to the chair of the finance committee, that'd be great. Just for instance, if you have it handy, what has been authorized and not borrowed as of now, that's not included in the new tax bill that the assessing department's getting the phone calls on?
So the amount that is authorized and unissued as of, I have to speak of it as of June 30th tonight. Well, and I estimate principal and interest as well, but let's just talk principal, is $32,790,000.
That's on top of what we've already borrowed and what they're reflecting on their tax bills today.
Correct.
Thank you. So I guess my point is, for the Finance Committee and the Board of Selectmen, those are the numbers I think that we need to look at while we're making decisions on what we think is important to the town here. Because if we didn't hear town meeting last year and our operating budget only being passed by about 25 votes, then we really weren't listening. People want a break. And wastewater, I guess I'll wait to debate that, Larry, but there's nothing in the Conservation Law Foundation's suit against us that says we have to win the race. We have to be in the race, but we don't have to win the race. So as we start talking about new phases, before we finish the Phase 2 in East Harwich and the $8 million shortfall created by bad estimating, we really have to look at when all that money's gonna hit before we approve town meeting this year, or even the DHY agreement, in my opinion.
Okay, I'll go Noreen first this time. She beat you by a second, Rich.
In terms of thinking for town meeting and the questions just asked, I was wondering if one of the many techniques we might consider with the financial information that you will probably distribute at town meeting, if we might have something very simple, like in terms of that 32.7, like our tax rate, 873, what's in it and what isn't in it. What isn't in it? Fire Station 2, Contract 1 and 2 of the sewer system, but it's just a thought. I mean, not in and of itself amongst other financial information, but just to bring it down to the level of the person who, you know, doesn't have time to follow all the.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you. Rich?
Okay. Fortunately, we have a lot of people that understand numbers in the town. My thought is they're not all MBAs, or else we'd have more of a discussion. But on your reports that Joe put together, the critical one, I think, if I were not involved in specifics here, if I just went to town meeting to vote, that tax impact chart,
At the last page, yeah.
the last page, drives it home to the average taxpayer. And if if we can enhance that in any way, that really tells the taxpayer, hey, I got a house, everybody said, okay, it's worth whatever. This is your tax impact as we plan it. And it's been a great way to say, here's our existing, you talked about debt service. Here's our existing debt, here's what's authorized but unissued that you brought up, Michael. And finally, here's the proposed debt of what this plan says. This is in plain English, and if you can be ready to discuss this in some way before the plan and the budget is proposed, this sort of puts it in perspective as a household expense. I'm paying $1,000 a quarter, and now you're telling me I'm gonna pay $1,100 a quarter. That sort of drives it to the lowest level and the most understandable level for the resident of Harwich, I think. You get asked by Harwich residents, how much am I gonna get impacted? Well, they can go to Rich Waystack, and maybe he can explain it, or they can go to a form.
Okay.
That's the only.
And they kind of, the two concepts are married, I think, what you and Noreen are saying.
Well,
Make
she's
it
at
simple.
Harwich. She's smarter. She's at a higher level.
Oh.
All I'm saying is something real simple that you
He's
can discuss.
getting smarter, though, you see,
Hopefully.
by that, yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's a good point, Michael.
Well, to expand on that, Richard, I agree with you. I understand what that means as a whole number. Taxpayers, I think, need to see a lot more of a breakdown of what the quint's gonna cost.
Simple.
Simple. What we are supporting and what that tax impact's gonna be on their house. Not a chart, not a graph, because I hear more often than not, I don't understand it. And let's keep in mind that I think last year was a high number at town meeting because of the pet cemetery controversy, and I think we had 600 and change. We don't get a lot of people to town meeting, so it's very few people making decisions, and I know that's our form of government. But I think at this table, we need to start explaining it better and getting it out there better and showing people what we're voting for. And then there's things you can't plan for. $8.4 million mistake on estimating on the sewer contract out in East Harwich. You know, there's certain things that we can't explain.
Okay. Don and then Angela.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to start off with a little bit of a metaphor here. I mean, with what we're looking at with these charts, it's somewhat like getting pulled over by the police for doing 80 miles an hour and for you telling them back, well, I slowed down from 100. That isn't really the point if the speed limit was 65. This chart begins on 2019, and it really doesn't give the flavor of what happened in 18, 17, and 16, because those are lower still than this. I'd like to give people a context, because we heard last year during discussions here where we had brought up the indebtedness and the tax rate to a certain level because of the sewering, but people will get used to it. And I kind of want to have a chart that shows what they're getting used to, because the fact of the matter is, this chart basically is the 100-mile-an-hour car going down to 80. That's not the point. The point is, a lot of people were paying at a particular rate when they got their tax bills, and they got sticker shock this year from 2 years ago, things that they were voting. We'll pause for Ed to answer that.
Tell them we're not home.
Tell them I'm busy right now. But what you really need to do is give them a context about, okay, here's where you came from, and here's where we are. Because as it looks here, 19 is the bargain year, but I'll bet you if you look at 18, 17, 16, that it's not the bargain year. Those were the bargain years, and that these are frightening bars. And they're not just a graph. It's people getting a bill that they have to pay. It's easy to say, well, they caused it themselves because they shot themselves in the foot, they passed it. But that's irrelevant. The fact is that it's a real thing now. And they have to pay it with real money. There's still a large mix of people here. Let me remind everybody, I know Michael's brought this up before. Tons of people here who were raised here, their parents were raised here, their parents' parents were raised here. And as one of them told me a couple of weeks ago, it's like, I don't have a 401k. I took in sewing. My husband did a second job to be able to live here. So their ability to expand their household budget to cover this is exhausted right now, never mind in the next few years. You got to explain to them what's at stake, what's still backed up that hasn't actually been billed, and what this does to them in addition to that. And I agree with Rich. It's got to be fairly simple because you get into the weeds with this and they're going to fog over. But they had a really simple discussion about this 1 or 2 days ago when they opened up another envelope and they got a bill that was like, whoa. So I think it's incumbent upon us to, so we can tell them what this means in context.
Okay. Angela?
Thank you, Larry. It strikes me, sitting here, that we've talked about the high level of potentially of the taxes for next year, and probably higher than you've even said in the letter that you wrote as a guide. But there's more than just taxes that come up with money. There's all the revenue for the various departments, which probably should be reviewed to see what could reasonably be increased. there's also putting everybody you can find into trying to get grants and trying to find cash one way or another. Because I think, unfortunately, I think, Michael, you're right, and I don't like to agree with you either. But I think it's going to be a very dangerous possibility of not getting the budget done, approved at town meeting, unless every rock has been looked under to see if the project should be done or cash should be developed from someplace. Thank you.
Thank you. Rich, one last comment?
Just one last comment. Historically, we've been very fortunate financially, okay, in the past. One thing we've never learned is to say no. And I think we're at a point, this group,
All of us.
okay, have to instill in our minds that no is still a good answer.
Yep.
So, I don't want to be the naysayer, but if we're worried about not increasing revenue, or we can't increase revenue, the only other way is to decrease the
Yep.
expense. So.
Agreed, John, and last comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with everything that's been said, and Michael brought up the authorized but unissued debt. And I took it one step further of proposed debt. And to Carol's point, she brought it out to the year 2078. Well, that proposed debt number is about $356 million if we bring it out to 2078. If you average that out by 58 years, it's close to $7.5 million a year. And that's just about what this chart is saying down there.
Yeah.
So, and then we have other debt, too, that isn't showing up in issued debt. And we have underfunded OPED. Michael brought up OPED. We aren't making the contributions there that we should be making. Well, that OPED debt, when you count in water, town, and schools, is $54 million of unfunded debt. So it's not a matter of saying no. It's up to town meeting, the people, to say no. We can be advisory, that's what our roles are here. It's just going to be awful hard to say no. I mean, if they said no at the next town meeting to everything, we still on the books, the obligating of close to $110 million of debt if they say no to everything. So I just want to get the education out there to the public.
Well, I think, anyone else have a comment? If not, I'm gonna close this discussion in a moment. We have our job set out for us. Let me just remind you that we do have a strong advisory, as you've all mentioned. We have to clearly look at our expenses, the debt going forward. We have to be careful that we look at priorities of what we're doing for the town. So we do have OPED, we have stability, we have fire, police, safety. We have a work cut out for us. I think the key, though, is to put this down, as many of you said, in a simple format, so we have a good public discussion. Because any decision going forward, we need a buy-in, not from this group. We may help, but we need a good buy-in from everyone in town.
Right.
And that's our job. That's what we'll be working on.
Exactly.
Okay?
You have
One last point, Don?
Yeah, since you mentioned a litany of things, I'm going to throw one other thing in here. The enterprise fund for the wastewater part of this, in its first few years, is estimated to be underwater. We had said we were going to take free cash and devote that to that so that we could have the operating capital and possibly hardship capital. We're not funding either of those right now in any scenario. So there's even more than what you're talking about.
Okay, with that encouraging word. Yeah, let's be careful, though. Let's look at, because we're in a transition here, let's just be careful that we remember that Harwich is a good place to live. But I would argue that it's the best community on the Cape now, and I'm not biased. And, you know, we're going through now a transition. We have, I don't have a feeling of all the towns, but we have extremely strong department head, strong staff work, hard workers. So we have things we have to work out of, but we're not starting in a negative mold. We're starting in a positive mold and trying to get a lot better. I just want to be sure we remember that, because sometimes you get into these discussions and it gets so depressing that you forget of where we are and what we're doing. Every organization, whether it's government or, can improve. Don't care what organization it is. We need to improve. But just remember where we are. That's enough preaching for me tonight, but just wanted to end it there. Okay, you guys want to adjourn your meeting?
Meeting is adjourned.
Is there any comment from?
I asked for comments and I didn't get any yet.
Thank you, Rich.
I might ask again.
You might ask,
I might want to ask again.
I'll ask again if there's any comments. Michael says I need to be overly polite.
From the public?
From the public.
Any more comments?
Any more comments from the public? If not, we're adjourned. Thank you all. And I thank you, Rich, and your committee and finance. Great job.
Oh, thanks. I want to talk stabilization before we put the deal down.
Okay, let's move on to the next item on the agenda. Is annual renewal license for 2020 entertainment. Joe, I'll turn this to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So these were the entertainment licenses that were prepared in the packet last meeting, but were not on the agenda. They've been vetted by staff, and we would ask that you approve them as presented, please.
Okay. Does anyone care to make a motion or discuss, or?
I guess I'll just ask a question if I may.
Sure.
When you get into the packet on this, you know, there's a couple pending approvals, which I'm okay with, but let's take the first one, Belmont Beach Club. License approved from Monday through Saturday, 10 a.m. to 11 p.m., and then it has the weekday hours. I'm assuming these have all been voted. Some say inside only, some that are obvious that are inside only don't say inside only. Are we opening it up so that they can do outside entertainment? You say vetted, I guess I'm asking, have we looked at what these licenses said last year and what's actually been voted? Some of them go to 1 a.m. I know, let me just, one more question.
Yeah, please.
Ember says 11:30 a.m. to 12 a.m. inside. So I think that probably means 12 p.m., not 12 a.m. But I'm a little confused with the times because everybody's different, and I thought we voted with the police chief a year or so ago to stop everything at 12 so everyone could get out of the bars.
And Michael, that was my question last week, actually, that they, these didn't seem to be uniform, and I wanted to double check that. And Joe, is that, they're different because they were different last year and we're sticking with that, or what's, do you recall, or should we go back and double check these?
So what I can tell you is that what staff did was compare the applications, the licensees for this year for renewal based on what was mailed out and who responded back, and then compared them to what the board had approved last year.
My question then is to follow up a discussion we had probably several months ago on trying to unify the times. Do we need to bring that back to the board and make an overall statement on that? Ed?
Well, it's my memory that if we grant a license, you get a renewal voted like this if it's the same from the previous year. If you change any of the conditions, you have to come in with a new application.
Thank you, Ed. I guess my question is what's our prerogative? Do we want to try to, and what are the steps? Do we want to try to unify these hours? And maybe we don't want to do it through town, but it's hard for me to say that Harwichport should be different from place to place, for instance. But, Michael, let me go to Don first, because he has his hand up first, and then I'll go to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is just a note. 12 a.m. is actually midnight. So if you look at this, as a specific problem I have is apparently Hot Stove Saloon can start entertainment at 9:30 at night, and they go all through the wee hours of the morning until 12:30 in the afternoon the next day. Because it says 12:30 PM.
Okay, Michael?
Yeah, and I was gonna say, those are two very obvious ones, I guess, and we
And-
could do the,
and-
we could do the motion to change those if what Ed is saying is correct. The good thing is we can change these, I guess,
Yeah.
weekly if we want to, so we can bring back the conversation to talk about,
Well, this,
making them unified, but I think for now, we're being asked to approve it. If we could just fix those couple typos, then
you want to move on that with conditional on the typos?
I would, yes.
If I, Mr. Chairman, if I can
Go.
speak to the most recent example just presented. Unfortunately, it was a typo that was perpetuated in the application for renewal.
Yeah.
So staff saw that and carried it over. But I like the direction this is going in. I would ask that the board approve them, and the board can, and staff can continue working to either correct or vet.
And I think the conditions are the typos and the improvements by the fire chief,
Correct.
pending approvals. Michael?
I move that we approve the annual entertainment license renewals 2020, fixing the typos and pending approval from Fire Department and Board of Health.
Second.
Any other discussion? Don?
Yeah, just one quick thing. Ed, were you suggesting not having any of these in the future on the agenda?
No, I was just saying that if somebody had a license last year and they want to continue it, they can put in for renewal. But if they want to change anything, they have to come in with a new application.
But I'm just checking on this because I had kind of insisted on this. Some years, things just dropped off because it didn't say anything about what the restrictions were on the motions.
No, I think it's good we have that.
Okay, I agree with that.
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, to that point, it's my understanding that that's what our letter states to the applicants. Here is your application for renewal. If there's any changes, that they would be handled as separate requests.
Okay, thank you, Joe. We have a motion and a second. Is there any comment from the audience? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next on the discussion on the agenda is the request from fill the potholes in South Whitefield and Round Cove Road. And Michael, before I go to you, let me, I asked Joel to contact our legal counsel on this because I think there's a pending lawsuit, and I think Joel has some feedback on that. Joe?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I did speak with counsel and asked to vet what latitude the board would have for this item in discussion this evening. The response essentially is that the board needs to tread lightly on this and have a very general discussion, given that much of what is in the agenda item relates back to pending litigation that is in Superior Court. So the board is allowed to talk about the concept of requests to fill potholes, but not much more beyond that, and not make any commitments of the town to do anything directly, because it is a pending litigation.
Okay. Michael? I'm sorry.
I guess that's useful information. I think I know where he's going with that. The request has been made, several people have asked that we fill the potholes, not widen the road, not pave the road, not put T-base down on the whole road, not fix a road for any private homeowners. But the road is now being used as a cut-through very, very often because of the road construction in East Harwich. And the road has deteriorated a lot. And I know that there's pending litigation on widening. I know that there's pending litigation on everything else. The request has been made, can we fill the potholes on Round Cove and Seth Whitefield Road? And I believe that with the, once the machinery gets on the other side of the intersection and crosses the intersection, the road will be even used a lot more. So that's the request, and I would support that request.
Any other comments? Don?
Yeah, to tie this into what these minutes state, if they have huge potholes, that's not passable. We agreed to keep the road passable, not to upgrade the road, not to widen the road or anything, but in the spirit of what Joe was saying before, we agreed to make it passable. And if they have developed to the point where it's not passable, then fixing it was within the guidelines that we had voted the last time.
Let me suggest to you that we just confirm that, Joe, and if that seems to be a minor thing to fill the potholes, that we could consider that without widening, doing anything else, but we'll see.
The only response I would say to that, Mr. Chairman, is council is advised if the
Not,
board
leave it
wants to
alone
go
for
that
now.
route, you're better off having a discussion next week in executive session relative to the status of the litigation to perhaps influence how the board wants to
But let me
proceed.
ask you a question. Does anyone have a sense of the status of the litigation, in terms of timing?
I'm sorry, I missed that last part, Mr. Chairman.
My question is, it sounds like our best shot is to do nothing because of the litigation.
I think attorneys would
And-
say that's well advised.
And doesn't seem to be any problem if that litigation is expected to happen in the next, say, before spring.
Correct.
If it starts getting into summer traffic, then maybe it's a different issue. My question was, is there any idea on the progress of the litigation, when they expect some ruling?
So the timeliness of this is I did receive correspondence that is being shared with the board. For whatever reason, it was presented to me as interim administrator, did not have the typical CC to the board. I received it on the 2nd. I had a chance to go through it today. It's being shared with the board tomorrow. Gives the board a full update on the recent actions of the litigation.
Okay,
But generally speaking, still pending.
all right. Michael?
I guess I would ask the board, and I'd like to ask the attorney, what does filling potholes on a town road have to do with litigation that doesn't spell out potholes? So this is litigation between a resident and the town of Harwich, correct?
Correct.
Now, it's a town road, not the resident's road, correct?
I wouldn't feel comfortable answering that based on confidential information that I've read regarding the town's strategy to litigation.
Why don't we put it on
I think we
executive
need to
session
walk
next
away from it now, and we'll bring it back in executive session if we need to. I don't want to jeopardize a lawsuit when a week won't matter. Ed?
Yeah, and, you know, looking at the material in the packet, it's a reprint of from the public hearing last May, but I don't see any documentation of the recent requests to fill the potholes
Yeah. Well-
here.
We'll bring it back in executive session next week. Okay?
But that was last May.
Required to maintain it as passable.
Moving to there's nothing on contracts tonight. The other one is a clarification if possible to David Harris. You know, we talked about this our last meeting, and our information, I don't know if I misspoke or it was misinterpreted, that he was going to be gone for a couple weeks, and it turns out he's gone for several months. And I just wanted to be sure we understood that. You know, my personal input in that is, you know, still a very viable member. I still would like to have it discussed. If we do one, we don't want to do two in the same committee, I guess. But I'm looking, what's the comment on it? Michael, you had your hand up here first.
Just reading through the material, I get the request, and the request is from David Harris on the planning board to miss
Right.
5 meetings. And his letter in here says not 5 months, or maybe that's Charlene's letter.
That was
5
Charlene's
meetings,
letter.
not 5 months. But 5 meetings, I guess, and I think that we really should relook at the policy. I know that we continue to make exceptions to the policy, and I did listen to the discussion from the board that David Harris is a good member of the planning board, and an important member of the planning board. The only thing I would point out, which I agree with, I think David Harris is a great member of the planning board, but we do have an alternate now. So we do have somebody on the planning board that is attending the meetings every week. And how often are we now gonna make exceptions for people to be away, 4
Right.
meetings, 5 meetings? And I think for the public's view, I think that they're here before the planning board with something they're trying to get approved, and they're trying to listen to somebody remotely and not be able to look at
Right.
that person and not appeal to that person. So I think we need to tread lightly on extensions.
Mr. Chair.
Let me, Don?
Generally, I agree with Michael, but the problem is, the planning board is governed by state law. The The alternate on a planning board can only vote on a special permit, nothing else. So their ability to actually function with an alternate as a replacement is limited.
Well, just if I may, just to clarify, Don, I'm saying that the alternate should be made a full member because he's at every meeting. And that,
Oh,
you
okay.
know, my point is, we have somebody that wants to be a full member of the planning board, that doesn't want to have the 5 weeks off. And I know David does this every year.
Right.
And again, he is important, and I don't want to diminish that, but.
Ed?
I read the item in our packet, and it says, "My concern, the selectmen's vote is that it was for 5 meetings, not 5 months." So which is it? Is it 5 meetings that he's going to
I read
miss,
from this,
or
it was 5 months.
5 months.
He's gonna meet
Missed,
so 10 meetings
right.
that he wants to remotely participate at. Okay.
I think that was our misunderstanding last time. We thought it was 5 meetings. Michael?
I guess the only other thing that's missing in my mind is, what does the chairman and the rest of the planning board think? Because it really, I think part of it should be their decision. What does the planning board want, and what does the planner, the town planner, Charlene, want?
I have 2 good questions. I think I'd like to see 2 actions. I think that's number 1. Get some other feedback from the planning board. I continue to think as a board of a selectmen, it'd be good for us to draft a policy that we think might help us out on this going forward.
Well, we do have a policy.
But it doesn't address this.
It only allows for 4 meetings.
Right.
So it would be a change of policy. if you
A
wanted
change,
to.
okay, I'm for a change of policy for that, and also my personal opinion always has been, if we do that, we can't have half the board take off. We need maybe 1 member of each board or something like that. Would anyone care to tackle that? Michael?
Quite frankly, I think, Larry, if we read through the policy that's in here, I think the policy is a good policy, and I think we're making an exception to a current policy, and we're being asked to. And
Right.
I would, before we rewrite the policy, that this case seems to be the only one. Larry Brophy from the Housing
Larry Brophy
Trust
was the second
was
one,
the
yeah.
second one this
Right.
year. So if we want to take a shot at extending or that, but if we have, which I'm happy to do, but I think right now we should ask the planner if she's okay with the remote participation and ask the planning board to take a vote
Okay,
on whether they want to give their alternate a full seat.
I'll follow up with that, and then we'll see where it goes. Is that okay with everyone else? Don, Ed? By the way, Steve isn't here, not he had a commitment he couldn't get out of. He's healthy. He'll be back next week, just to point that out. Okay, that's enough on that, then we'll follow up. Next on the agenda is a series of items on the search committee. And number 1, and Joe, I'll let you walk through some of these.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. So you can see in the agenda, first item you have is a proposed timeline for the 2020 search for a town administrator. There's a number of activities that go from this meeting straight through to an anticipated date of the new administrator. So the timeline also identifies some key actions that the board wants to be aware of and take. Those are also delineated on the agenda itself, meaning you would want to have a discussion on your search committee composition. I was able to obtain salary information late this afternoon that I forwarded to you, Mr. Chairman, and I have a hard copy here if you want to refer to that. And I do know that Patty, as executive assistant, provided information on the search firms. And then beyond that, the potential position description and job advertisement, I would defer to you all on.
Okay, let me just underline and emphasize that all these items are proposed or draft going forward. You get comments from everyone. I didn't get a chance to look at the salary information. Why don't we just, we can email that to everyone.
Just one time.
Well, and Joe, let's email that to the full board.
That's just a point of reference for this evening, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Any comment on the timeline? Don?
Just one thought. It's kind of like the same comment that was made about the sewering, about winning the race. In this timeline, and where we are sitting today, there is, no matter what we do, even if we adhere to every single critical juncture here, there is 0% possibility of this person, whoever it might be, having an impact on the warrant articles, the budget, the capital
Absolutely.
plan.
It's not part of this year's
So,
town
given,
meeting.
given that fact, I'm not overly worried about adhering to any of these timelines relative to what's gonna happen at this town meeting.
I don't disagree with that, but I would argue that we should have some targets to go forward, or it might,
Absolutely, but I'm just saying that it's not like imperative or all hell's gonna break loose, because it isn't.
I'm gratified to hear that. Joe, next discussion of the Boulder Search Committee composition. Ed?
Before you move on,
Yeah.
the time, looking at it, it basically, in my mind, seems incredibly rushed. You know, you just look at
Okay, that's it.
the process of first having to pick a search firm, much less
Okay.
get them up and operating. They typically want to have a time to sort of do some interviews around
Right.
town.
Yeah.
That tends to be fairly extensive, so they know what type of person they're looking for, trying to recruit to get as good a feel,
Yeah.
you know. And then the other thing that I voted no on appointing town administrators before for this reason is we interview on a Saturday and appoint on a Monday. That leaves very little time for any possibility of a site visit of people we may be considering. I know a school committee would never hire a new superintendent without having done a site visit. I've never hired a senior public administrator without doing a site visit.
Okay.
So I think that needs to be factored in.
Points taken, Michael. Based on these two, I'll go back and work with Joe. You and I will work, and we'll stretch this out a bit, give us a little more time. Michael, you comfortable with that as well?
Very comfortable. I think we do need more time, but I think time is of the essence. And I think I agree with you and what your first part of the strategy was, but I really do hope that we do our due diligence on this town administrator, and that we do some site visits and some background
Yeah.
checks.
We'll do that. You're correct. I was trying to be somewhat aggressive because I want to keep it moving. But your points are well taken. I'll work with Joe, and I keep looking at Joe. Joe, you and I will work
Slow
on this.
down
to
there,
an extent.
Tiger.
Well, just with that, Larry, I'd like to thank you for the amount of work you've done on this. There was an awful lot of emails this week and an awful lot of documents circulated, so
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you. We'll make some corrections or changes in that. Next is the search committee composition. Now, what we talked about, I think, Donna, it was your suggestion that I've been trying to follow up on, is that we appoint a 5-member search committee. And a good start of that would be for each of us to nominate someone for the search committee. And I know Steve has given me his nomination. Don, is that process okay? Number one, is everyone comfortable with that, as populating the search committee?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, you had alluded to the fact that perhaps a recommendation by somebody might not be well received by the board. I mean, the charter calls for a 4/5 vote to actually hire a
Right.
town administrator. So I would suggest that in order to have that safety valve, if you wanted to have the same 4/5 rejection vote for a candidate on this committee, that would
Makes sense.
make sense,
Makes
because
sense.
you'd be able, but I also think that it's important, given how fractious some of this stuff has been and how it has to absolutely be 4/5 or more to hire somebody, that everybody feels comfortable that they got some voice at the table representing them.
Okay. That's certainly agreeable to me, but it's to everyone else. You want me to start? Michael?
My 2 cents on this is, this has to be a very public process. And we
Absolutely.
have to have as much public input as we can on what they want for a town administrator.
Yeah.
And just looking at, I don't know, 25 towns today that have recently gone out for town administrator searches, I'm not that interested in hiring a search firm to give me 3 people to look at with a representative of mine and a representative of yours on there without public input. And looking at how some of the towns did it, and one neighboring town, Brewster, did it, they hired a search firm, which uses the name consulting rather than search, I believe. But they had a very specific part of it that was for public input, and they reached out to the public, and they had a very specific part that was employee department heads, where they got to weigh in.
Right.
So I'm fine with picking somebody, so long as we really make an effort to make the public involved in this.
Let me,
because they should say what they want.
Thank you, Michael. Let me just comment to that first, Ed, because, Michael, you shared a little bit of this before the meeting tonight. I think that, I'd like for you to send that to me. I want to send that to the rest of the board, and I think we can discuss that and use that as our, some of our charge to our search committee. Because it's been, Brewster just did it, seemed to work well for him. And we've promised everyone throughout we'd be completely transparent, and that's our charge. Ed?
You say the public and the department heads participated in the process. Was that in the part specifying what sort of department head that was being looked for, or the part of the process of basically interviewing?
What part of the town administrator, that part of what we're looking for, the definition of what we are looking for
Okay, yeah.
as a town,
Not-
not part of the.
Not part of the interview,
Okay.
yeah.
And I guess the second part of that comment, Larry, would be, again, I have no problem picking somebody, and because you requested this and it was
Right.
it was thing, I've actually interviewed several people that have called and showed interest. But there's another way to do this, which would be to have citizens fill out a citizens activity form and interview people for this process. I'm fine with either one, as long as we include the public, and as long as they're very involved. I
Okay.
don't want to do this behind closed doors and have it be our 5 decision. I want them to be involved.
I think I'd like to go ahead with us nominating someone and move that way at this time. And I'll get the ball rolling, and I'll pick on Steve Ford, because his recommendation for this committee is Julie Kavanaugh. Is a past member of the board and the experience that we all know about. My nominee to the committee would be, or is, Linda Sabula. Also because she's had past experience, she's had good financial input, I think, into the questioning. And so those are 2. Don?
Yeah, my nominee would be Norm Clark.
And I guess that nominee's okay because he's retiring at the, before this go.
the race at all.
He's retiring, so otherwise, I want to be careful that we don't have department heads on there, but I get that.
That was why
Okay. Ed?
My nominee is Dan
Wolf? Okay.
Dan Wolf.
Dan Wolf? We all know Dan's background, so we don't need to explore that. Michael?
I'm going to nominate a fellow by the name of Michael Hurley. He is the acting police chief, or the police chief in the town of Wellfleet, and he is a 20-year resident of the town of Harwich.
Good.
And I did a lot of thoughtful discussions with a lot of people on what they were looking for and what we were looking for. I guess now that we've all picked, I think
Yeah.
I'm going to give a comment that may not be taken well and may be taken well.
Yeah.
Looking at these picks, we're picking past selectmen and town employees. I guess they've been involved, so I
Yeah.
guess I could say that they've been involved in the town, but we're not picking a lot of new faces, and that's why I wonder, honestly, if the other process and having people fill out an application and then them being vetted makes more sense, but certainly I've worked with Linda, Julie, Norm, and Dan.
I think
Wolf.
they'll give
his
us strong-
reputation speaks for itself,
Yeah.
so.
Okay, I appreciate the comment. What's the judgment? My judgment is to move ahead with where we are. And I appreciate your comment, Michael. I think our charge now is to do your first suggestion, be sure that we have this open up so it's a good, open discussion going forward. Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a little premature, except I'm going to repeat this over and over as this process goes on here. I mean, in my career in the federal government, I hired a ton of people that were trainees for things, as opposed to hiring on a basis of experience. Now, having said that, given the experience now and earlier, the last decade, I would personally feel that it's much more important to get an outstanding individual that is truthful, motivated, wants to find out things, and wants it to be collaborative, who has average or above average skills, because those can be filled in, than I would getting an outstanding person who could take a test and get a 99 on it, but is a mediocre leader. The one thing that should be at the top of everyone's criteria should be leadership. And leadership does not mean I'm out in front and nobody else follows me. Leadership means that everybody's involved in this.
That's a great segue, Don, because the other two items I put in your packet, one was a draft position description. I've got one comment. I know Michael sent me a couple comments. Actually asked me to I thought I had done it, but emphasize more the leadership part of that and the financial leadership. In response to that, I have another draft that I've added 2 comments. I'll email everyone. The purpose of this is not to. Purpose of me doing that was not to necessarily give a position description for the new hire or job goals and objectives for the new hire. It was for us to have a discussion on what we think is most important going forward. So I appreciate any comments you have, and we'll modify it so at least we have the same talking points. Michael?
I think just if I could just go back to the other subject real quick. Has all the board members vetted the people that they suggested? Are they in? Stan Wolf said yes. Yep.
Are they in?
Okay.
Yeah, I did, yeah.
Okay.
Yep, I did.
And we don't need a motion on that.
We don't
just
need a motion on that, thank you.
And for what we're looking for, Larry, I think I sent you everything I can send you, and I
Yeah.
did send you a document today from the town of Brewster that said, which was kind of the criteria that they put down to
Right.
formulate that.
And I'm going to circulate others because that was a good document, thank you. The other comment I would make, and this is ongoing, so send me any comments on this. I want us to all come together on this. The other item I took the liberty of doing is putting in a draft job advertisement. And I have to be honest, I plagiarized this from Brewster.
The first recruitment or the second
What
one?
I plagiarize anything I can, Don, I'm not proud.
That's a trick question. The first one wouldn't be something I'd emulate.
The modification I did make, and I made it for a reason to what I put out, is I tried to broaden this to be sure that when we have a search committee, when we interview people, we open ourselves up to possibly hiring someone that not necessarily has government experience. If they had come to us with a wealth of experience, leadership skills, that we feel is important enough that we can train them on some of the government aspects. I don't want to, I know it's unusual to do that, but I don't want to close the door for that. And so that's the reason I did this draft, because I wanted to throw that out going forward. And again, draft, I certainly have no, I've already stolen it from another town, so I obviously have no pride of ownership in this. Michael?
Just to expand on that, Larry, if we could come to some sort of agreement at least that when we hire a search firm, that we're looking at all the applications. Our committee that we just put together should review all of the applications. It seems that a lot of these towns are hiring search firms, and they bring forward 3 names, sometimes 6 names, and then they vet them down to 3 names. And in a lot of their reports back to the town, they talk about how fewer candidates there are.
Yeah.
And we have done this in Harwich over the last couple of years. We've thrown away applications of very good people because they didn't meet one piece of criteria in our ad. And I think we should have a pile B that we look back through if we don't find a person, and stop with the notion that we're gonna hire a company to vet it for us. And in a lot of cases, if you go back and look at who they bring forward, it's the same names to the same jobs in different towns, lots of different towns.
I think that's an easy definition. We'll ask a search firm to give us 3 recommendations, but include all the applicants. Fair enough. Ed?
Yeah, these drafts, documents?
Yeah.
Were they in the packet?
I sent them to y'all. I think they may have missed the packet, y'all. We
Okay.
discussed that. They were meant to be in a packet, but they got overlooked. I did email them to you this weekend,
Okay. Let's
and
see if I can find
they got missed. If not, I'll email again, but I did email them to y'all. Because they're all drafts. I'm looking for feedback. We have to be transparent, but we also have to be transparent among ourselves and be sure we all have input. Don, except for you.
Yeah, I'd like to back up what Michael had said. One of the biggest mistakes these people do inferentially because of the process they follow by goaltending out people is they're missing the point. I don't really care about them writing a dandy memo or a terrific resume because the reality is if they get pushed aside initially, you're never going to physically see anybody. And their ability to be a galvanizing force, to demonstrate that they have leadership, wouldn't come out until you actually talk to them. So Michael's right. There have been a number of excellent people that have been precluded from even showing up into the room because, well, the paper that they submitted isn't as good looking as the other person. And that misses the point about what this job is going to do.
Well, I think you've given me marching orders for another draft document, and I'm going to take, Michael, what you sent me, and try to define some items we wish to, for the search committee to take care of. And so we do those actions. Elaine? You sure may?
Elaine Shovlin. I just want to reinforce what Michael brought up before. I have served on search committees at a major university for president of alumni relations, president of the foundation, and other high-level positions. Our process was to invite alumni representatives, invite staff, invite everyone who had any part in the game. And even though you can't please all the people all the time, at least no one could come back and say, well, no one asked our opinion. We went out of the way to make sure we contacted every part, anyone who would have a voice. So I agree, Michael, that's something that really should be done. Thank you.
Should be their first meeting.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. That's it. Gary, you sure may?
Yeah, just as I was listening to this, I'm from
I'm
the
sorry, identify yourself.
Yeah,
for the-
Gary Conroy, Bay Road. As I'm listening to this, you know, I lived my whole life in the private sector, so I don't know how town government works. But one of my observations about the town is you should be looking and thinking of the town administrator as the CEO of the town. You're the board of directors, and you've got all the department heads, you know, running their piece of the pie. But I think the CEO of the town needs to be visible, have those leadership qualities that Don talked about, but also very hands-on. And how do you elevate the town government from a standards and execution standpoint? I just went down to, I want to say it was Centerville and Katuitt, and their public spaces seem a lot more important to them than Harwich. And I think the CEO has to have that vision of where he or she wants the town to go and lead the team to get there. Thank you.
Gary, just to follow up on that, if the, I think, Joe, maybe the goals and objectives didn't make it into the packet. We'll include that so you can look at it and give us comments. I tried to build that vision, some of that stuff into those as we go forward. I appreciate you. In fact, if you give me your email, I'll email it to you before we'll follow up and get your input. Okay, Michael?
If we could just expand on the last two people that spoke, I think that it is important that everybody in town knows that we're elected officials that are elected by you. So your comments are extremely important. Every one of us has an email address. Somebody voted for every one of us, so email any input that you have, email any question you have, and then we should put that into the record on this and submit it. So encourage your neighbors, encourage anyone in town to get involved in this process. It's extremely important.
Can only agree. Any other comments, questions? If not, then we'll, I think we've covered these subjects. Joe?
If I could, Mr. Chairman, I just want to ask the board some follow-up questions on the information on salaries.
Okay.
Excuse me. So the email that you have, Mr. Chairman, I can send to the board tomorrow.
Okay.
But I just wanted to explain the resource that I've been able to tap today. It's both good and bad. It's Mass Municipal Association. So of course, we're a member community, and in my role as Assistant Town Administrator, I have access to the HR portal that they have.
Okay.
So the HR portal that they have has a number of salary surveys. I was able to access that this afternoon. However, I want to let the board know that it's not as robust as I would have thought it was. There are about 79 communities that have responded over time to the salary surveys, the most recent one being in this fiscal year. I did a initial query for the board of any town that responded to the survey that has a chief admin function of town administrator. 33 responses came back, so that's what I sent to you, Mr. Chairman, was those 33.
Responses from individual towns or from MMA?
This is from towns that responded to an MMA survey. So it's the average salaries of towns that have a town administrator title. The second search I did was similar size communities. Now, just to try and test the database, again, total resources, 79 communities. They may not all apply, but I did similar size communities. I did 1,000-person variable of 12,000 to 14,000. That only yielded 5 communities for a search. So you've got one database that I've done that has 33 communities, one that has 5. Neither of them contain any Cape Cod towns. So I offer that where there's some baseline information that gives the board a good range, if you will, for salary, but it does not touch back to Cape Cod, and it doesn't necessarily get to a wider distribution, if you will.
Well,
to my knowledge, there's no readily available database that covers all municipalities.
Thank you, Joe. I hate to put this on you, but what I'd like to know is Cape Towns, well, I'd like to get from each Cape Town actually position description and their salary plus benefits, so we're comparing, because sometimes these surveys are reported different ways, salaries versus, so they could be off 40%, right? They don't include benefits and everything.
Entirely
to the
possible,
salaries.
yeah. There is a recent Cape Cod survey that Chatham had commissioned a year ago.
Yeah.
So it's slightly dated, but I think it would be a good resource
Good resource.
to tap into and see how dated it is.
Then we can compare what people are doing and get actual data. If we could do that, that'd be great. Any other comments, questions? Michael?
Stephen had put together some numbers too, so maybe.
Right, we'll get Stephen. I know Stephen's working on it. I'm gonna push back
I
at
would hope
him.
that when we present this and when we discuss this, we can come up with a range in salary. We don't
Yeah.
have to say that the job is gonna be
A
a
range.
demoralizing amount of 165,000. We want it to be a range or up to, so that we're not disqualifying people.
Absolutely. Okay, but good start, Joe. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's an item we need to get after. We have ways to get there, so we'll spend some time getting to be sure these facts are correct. Next then is, Joe, we're back to you. I guess we are in every item, but this is in the town administrator's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All I really have to bring up is just that with tonight's hearing on the capital outlay plan, the next major deliverable on the timeline relates to procurement to get accurate bid pricing. So the deadline for that, it's an internal deadline, is Friday, the 24th of January. But I'll be reminding department heads of that at the department head meeting
Okay.
later in this month. And the finance director and I are going to be picking up where we left off from literally last year to get back into the budgets in anticipation of the February 3rd deliverable.
Okay.
And that is my report.
And, Michael?
Just to back up a couple, the
Yeah.
information on search firms, I just want to note that next week on the 13th, we have 3 search
Right, I'm
firms
sorry.
presenting to us.
Yeah.
Is that,
They're committed to present if that's what the boards want. Yep,
Do
there
we
are
want-
three
do we
firms that
want
have
that?
committed to
I think so.
present.
There's no reason not to. Well, there is one reason not to, and that is, this is a little different than what Joe and I talked initially. We're missing one search firm. I wanted to be all at the same night. So let me throw that back before I do jump ahead. Do we,
There was a follow-up on that one. It
Okay.
wasn't that there was a schedule conflict, it's that there is a load management conflict. They've got too much business. So they
oh, so
weren't-
they're
they were
not interested?
in
They're
presenting.
not
Yeah.
interested?
To be blunt, yes.
Okay,
so can we move forward next week so the public knows
I
that we're
think
going to
so.
interview search
Yeah.
firms?
yeah, let's do that and it'll be on, but that's right, it should be, I'm glad you say that.
Yeah, and from a procurement standpoint, we would just be looking for the board to ask them general questions. It wouldn't necessarily be relative to price or things like that, because price gets into requests for proposals and all that. It's meant to be more of a meet and greet, and understanding of the firms, of their availability, their styles, and how they approach searches.
And my assumption is that we'd have some follow-up meetings on this as well. This is the first one. I think what we talked about was giving each firm, not a lot of time, maybe 10, 15 minutes, and then same amount of time for questions. And then I'm sure we'll have some debate. We're not planning on making a decision next week, but we'll have the information. Michael, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Ed?
So, in the process, are we planning on putting out a request for proposal, or,
We will at some point.
okay, all right.
We'll have to. Yeah. Don?
Can we go back to the town administrator's report? I don't want to have this get lost in anything. It's been a pet peeve of mine. I know a number of us share this same thought. This is where the wheels have fallen off the cart in the past. Make sure that we have a timeline, deadline, to have bid specifications in for items that are going to be capital items, so that we have a solid number sitting in front of town meeting, as opposed to a speculation about what things might cost if we were thinking about it. Would go a long way to try to restore the credibility that everybody has lost over the last few years.
I can only say we've talked about all of us several times, and that we need to have that happen, Don.
Well, I didn't want to let that go by without mentioning that we're going back to basics. We're putting bids out, and we actually expect a real number in front of town meeting if we make a request of them.
Yeah, that may be, Joe, let's talk about that, how we put that in the timeline of a point where it goes before it goes into the town warrant, how we handle that. Okay, Michael?
Sorry to be bouncing around, but we are skipping over things quickly. To Ed's comment about requests for proposals.
Yeah.
We're not gonna be tied if we do a request for proposal with the three that present to us.
No.
Based on dollar
right.
amount, can we, I mean, if all of us agree that the one that's a little bit more expensive is the one, we're not stuck to low bid on something like that, okay?
No, and that's the benefit of proposals, because you can have qualifications in there. The reason why I bring it up is one of the firms was concerned about that. I don't know that they've had issues, or it's been relayed to them in the past in other searches that they've done. But they inquired as to what was the purpose for next week as it relates to procurement. So I had a discussion with staff and reminded them that the board is well within their rights to have a meet and greet discussion next week, absent of pricing proposal, to get a sense of the availability of the firms, how the firms apply their searches, any recommendations they might make to you all as you do this search, but separate from what would be a procurement process.
Thank you.
The marketplace, however, is fairly limited. You'll find anywhere from probably no more than really 6 firms that do it, but you'll find that there are really 3 or 4 that are most active.
Okay. Okay. Anything else?
No, and I found that if you just go online and research who's using who and their luck with town administrators, it's a pretty easy choice.
Yeah,
Savvy strategy.
I found the same on that. Okay, that's for the town administrator's report. Last on the agenda, selectmen's reports. Don, I'll start with you.
Nothing but I hope everybody has a happy and healthy future new year.
Ed?
Next year's?
Well, we just passed New Year's Day.
All right, yeah, no, I'm fine.
Yeah, well, of course, we're all depressed after Patriots got beat, but we'll move on. I have nothing. Michael?
Mine's more of an agenda item.
Okay.
Pet cemetery update. I call it pet cemetery, it's not the pet cemetery. But can we get an update on what we're doing with the land? I think the will of the people at town meeting overwhelmingly wanted to do something with that piece of land. And I was asked 3 times this week what somebody has to do to put something back on the table for that land.
Okay.
Bank Street Firehouse, well, we did talk about it, and we sent it to Real Estate and Open Space. So we just need to get a report, and then the board should have a discussion on what the board's thoughts are.
Yep.
Bank Street Firehouse update, when are we
That's
tearing it
good, dude.
down? And the will of the people on that one was to sell that and put the money back into something.
Yep.
Water Collaborative, financial planning, what are we gonna do with the money going into the Water Collaborative? If my understanding, if we don't have a good plan as to what we're gonna use that money for, we don't have a shot at getting any of it out.
Yeah.
So, we should have a conversation anyway.
Rentals?
No, Water Collaborative, the tax, the 1.75% sewer money. Second was, Don, thank you, the first 2 quarters of the rental tax calculation should be available to us. How much money with the expanded rental tax did we get? And then the board maybe should have a conversation about
What we do with
where
it.
we're gonna go with that money,
Yep.
if instead of, but I think all those are important going up to planning, budgets, capital planning. All these can play a part in that. There's some other ones too, but those were the most important ones. So
Okay.
if I could get an update or an agenda item on those.
Yep.
Thank you.
We'll do that. Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The wastewater management board has already made one decision on this, is that the criteria for dispersing the money is going to really be contingent on how mature their plan is. Like a comprehensive wastewater management plan will count more than just an idea of a project.
Right. Okay. Elaine, please.
Elaine Shevlin, Chair, Real Estate and Open Space Committee. On our agenda for our next meeting on the 17th, next Friday, Dan Pelletier, Superintendent of the Water Department, is attending to discuss the former Pet Cemetery property, as they are interested in maybe using that property. So we'll have that discussion with him, and then evaluate and make our recommendation back to you all what we come up with.
So possibly, what would be a good date when you would follow up with your discussion, that you'd be ready to come to us?
Well, our meeting is Friday. We could probably be prepared the next Monday.
Okay. Michael?
Just as a follow-up, Friday the 17th, where and what time?
In the room right next door, the small room at 8:30 in the morning.
And then for the public, if somebody has another idea, is the agenda item cover somebody else coming, or is it just for the water department to come and talk about their potential
Well,
use?
I haven't posted the agenda yet, so I can amend it to make whatever, but they did express an interest in the property.
Okay.
Someone else had also mentioned the possibility of getting an appraisal and maybe selling them, but the only earnest interest has been from the water department.
Okay. So I guess my question to the board is, other ideas, where should they go? To the Board of Selectmen?
I would think they go to the Real
Yeah.
Estate and Open Space
Yeah, I
first,
think it
and then come to
comes
us
to
after
us.
it's gone through that committee. Ed?
Yeah.
And if we
But
receive...
I appreciate the comments, so hopefully people are watching this, if they have ideas, they'll come to you with other
Well, if they
proposals.
do, then we might not be prepared for that following Monday. We would have to, meet with other folks. But that's where it stands right now.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Elaine. Anything else? If not, I'll,
Motion to adjourn?
second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.